Every action story that's ever been written can only end in one way, with the death of one of its main characters. Now, usually that character is the villain, because what kind of stories are you telling if it ends with the hero dying and evil taking over the world? We're not saying that inverting this trope never works, we're just saying that for it to work, it has to be executed flawlessly. For instance, take Berserk. The story began with Guts' quest to hunt down and execute every demon in existence, including the God Hand and especially Griffith. But that feeling doesn't seem to be mutual, because despite antagonizing him and calling him a squirming worm in comparison to himself, Griffith isn't all that interested in actually killing Guts. This is despite knowing that Guts is one of the biggest obstacles to the procurement of his dream, and it's not like he's never had the opportunity to do so. So why hasn't Griffith killed Guts yet? And how might this backfire on him in the long run? Let's take a look at all that and more in this video. Griffith wanted to kill Guts shortly before becoming a God Hand. Now, just because Griffith hasn't killed Guts, it doesn't mean that he doesn't want to do it. In CW's The Flash, Eobard Thawne spends 15 years creating and training his arch-nemesis just so he can use his power to kill him how he wants to kill him. Villains that are hot-headed and impulsive might be more dangerous in the short term, but those who play the long game and play it with such confidence that it's downright terrifying how in control they are of themselves, well, let's just say that they're the definition of pure evil. Interestingly enough, based on this description, Griffith falls in the former category of villain because, to be honest with you guys, his hatred for Guts was born shortly before his demise. When Griffith first met Guts, he didn't hate him or even dislike him like some of his comrades. He recognized his merits and was genuinely curious about his life. Once he got a taste of it, he became convinced that Guts could become the sword with which he claims his throne. So he recruited him into the Falcons and started tailoring his plans based on Guts' strength and impulsivity. Before his inclusion, the Falcons would always stick to the play and follow Griffith's lead without question, because that way, their success was assured 10 out of 10 times. The White Falcon was a military genius without peer, and his strategies kept his band undefeated throughout their active military career. But when Guts joined up with them, they started becoming more and more free-flowing because his raiders were Griffith's vanguard, and his actions started influencing the course of the battle. Griffith didn't mind this at all because he knew Guts would hold up his end of the bargain. All he had to do was anticipate his impulsivity and plan around it, which worked like a dream, but also made his other commanders jealous of Guts. Griffith had never protected the actions of just one soldier like this in his entire time leading the band, and it was clear to all that Guts was his favorite. Griffith was the last one to realize that they had become such fast friends that Guts' health and safety started taking priority over his dream, and that reality hit him when Guts abandoned him. Casca once said that a man who has ambition as great as Griffith needs to make himself strong in order to pursue said ambition. They don't realize it, but it's the people they surround themselves with that give them their strength and share their burdens with them. Casca had no interest in making her support known, she only meant to give it to him. But Guts wasn't the same. Ever since he heard what a true friend would be to Griffith, that being a man with a similar ambition and persistence, he resolved to become that man, not realizing that being his equal was what would drive them apart. Guts, being the man that he is, didn't explain himself upon his departure. To Griffith, he just up and left one day and took his dream with him. The White Falcon had come to rely on Guts in a way he had never relied on Judo or even Casca. Guts was his keeper, the man who shared his silence on matters that can blight the very soul. He'd carried out assassinations and kidnappings in his name and been part of his vilest schemes. Had Griffith simply acknowledged that they were already equals by means of being friends, Berserk wouldn't have needed a story, but that clearly didn't happen. Ego won out where emotion should have, and Griffith became possessed with hating Guts the moment his sword snapped in the snow that dreadful morning. To him, Guts was his most precious possession. He thought his will was Guts' will, and that his little "I will decide the day you die" speech had won him the man's loyalty for life. That's how things usually played out for him, but he didn't know that Guts had heard his "what's a friend to me" speech as well. When he realized it, he broke. He couldn't accept responsibility for driving his best asset away, and he couldn't acknowledge his own feelings of friendship towards Guts. Griffith decided to seduce Charlotte right away to cast Guts out of his mind, but the entire time they were together, all he could think of was the swordsman. He became fixated on Guts to such an extent that during his imprisonment, he came to see Guts as an anchor to his sanity and the reason for his insanity. Griffith only survived his torture because his mind was laser focused on two things: his dream and his memories of Guts. But the longer he was locked up, the more his dream faded, and the more Guts became the only thing clear in his mind, blazing through like a light in the darkness. Griffith hated that, more than anything else, his subconscious mind was helping him get through unspeakable pain by anchoring him to the one authentic bond he'd built in his life, yet his consciousness couldn't accept the replacement of his oldest desire with this new one. To Griffith, it was as though he was betraying himself by abandoning his dream and choosing Guts, so he decided he would hate him instead. The moment his cell door was thrown open by the rescue team, Griffith wanted to strangle him. Even though he'd lost all mobility, he tried to choke the life out of the man who gave him so much misery. What stayed his hands were Guts' tears, because Griffith saw that he'd truly missed him in their time apart. He softened his stance for a while until he realized Guts had not only become much stronger than he was, he'd also stolen Casca from him. As Griffith spent more time with his rescuers, he was filled in on the circumstances of their survival because he was still smart enough to figure out that his men would have been persecuted for his actions. He was surprised to see how well Casca had done cheating death, and now that his dream was in its death throes, his mind wanted comfort. To him, she was going to be the provider of that comfort because that's the dynamic they'd always shared. Now that Casca was with Guts, he had taken away Griffith's comfort as well, so his urge to hurt him started trumping his urge to kill him. Griffith tried molesting Casca shortly after their encounter with Wild because he needed to regain some sense of power over Guts' life. When that failed, and Casca pitied him instead, he realized that the pursuit of his dream would grant him his current desire. In the chase for a throne, Griffith had left piles and piles of corpses in his wake, and if he just got away from Guts, he could just keep doing that. The chase that followed ended with the eclipse, and this is where things become morbidly interesting. When Griffith became Femto, his existential form changed, as did his feelings. Griffith's desire to kill Guts wasn't dead when the eclipse was triggered, but it was certainly shaky in the face of what they were witnessing. His already fragile mind had nearly made him take his own life, and he broke his arm trying to get away from Guts and the rest of his friends. The towering figures of the God Hand and the scores of raving apostles that had gathered in their wake was enough to terrify even the most stoic of stoics, so it was only natural that Griffith would be afraid of them at first. However, once he entered Ubik's truth program and was sufficiently suggestible to accept the God Hand's deal, he also inadvertently signed up to do what he'd wanted to do since escaping prison, and that was killing Guts. The ritual to become a God Hand member requires a massive sacrifice. A single person won't cut it because it transforms the very nature of the person performing it. Apostle sacrifices only expose the dark truths within a human being and gives them power enough to live those truths. God Hand sacrifices pull a human being from the physical world into the depths of the astral world, and as such, requires them to give up way more than just a loved one. They need to sacrifice their entire soul for the process to be successful, and Guts was naturally included in this category, being perhaps the biggest piece of Griffith's humanity. When Griffith accepted the God Hand's deal, he condemned Guts in particular because he was thinking about his dream in that moment. His final thoughts as a human were how, out of the thousands of comrades he'd come across and the tens of thousands his actions had killed, Guts was the only one who made him give up on his dream. And for that, he needed to die. From the moment his body became enveloped in a cocoon of light, Griffith ceased being human. As his soul descended into the depths of the astral world, he could feel the souls of his fellow soldiers being ripped apart by the apostles, piercing through his own. He'd known these men for years, fought and bled beside them, seen days filled with glory and death alike, but in this moment, he felt nothing after leaving them at the mercy of a cruel and ruthless fate. His human heart was now frozen by his demon's blood, so that he could pursue his desires without human inhibitions. When Griffith transformed into Femto, most of the 500 members of the Band of the Falcon were dead, and the 2 remaining members would soon join them. He proceeded to violate Casca sexually and force Guts to watch the entire thing, not because he was emotional about it, but because he wasn't. As Femto, Griffith's sole purpose in life was to devote himself to the pursuit of his dream and the path of evil. Violating Casca wasn't personal, but it was in the sense that he wanted to break Guts mentally before he did so physically. Complete and utter annihilation is what he desired in that moment. But when Skull Knight rescued him and Casca, Griffith only tried to stop him. Their escape didn't really bother him as much as it should have if he were taking things personally, but the thing is, Griffith no longer had a heart to even feel things like that. It was frozen now, and Guts' continued survival became nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. You would think that not fulfilling a sacrificial ceremony would mean that the recipient wouldn't be at full power, or there would be some kind of malfunction with their powers, but neither seems true for Griffith. Femto became one of the most powerful and sadistic God Hand members, even more so than Slan, Ubik, and Conrad, because the one time we see him in action during a demon ritual, he's the one pushing for the target to make the sacrifice. It's also during that ritual that he sees Guts again, but he isn't as concerned with killing him as he is with fulfilling his his higher purpose. When Guts sees Griffith, he immediately curses him out and tries to lunge at him with Dragon Slayer, but Femto simply remarks that he's still squirming about in his pitiful existence and that his petty being was beneath the God Hand's notice. The Demon King flings Guts into a pillar when he gets close to landing a blow with Dragon Slayer, and he casually states that he's unintentionally granted the slug count his wish. Griffith's desire here clearly isn't to kill Guts, but to get on with the main event, which is assuring the count ascends again. He treats Guts like a minor inconvenience and is mildly amused by his resilience at best. This is because when he became a God Hand member, Griffith gave up all his emotions, including his hatred for Guts. The Black Swordsman was no longer a target for him, and the fact that their paths kept intersecting wasn't because of a spirit of vengeance like the Spectre, it was because of Causality's plan. Femto knew that pursuing Griffith's dream and bringing Causality's will to life were one and the same, so he would always prioritize his role as a God Hand above petty squabbles from a past life. His higher understanding of existence itself allowed him to forego such things, but that changed too when he took on a body of flesh to fulfill his purpose. This is because in taking on a human body, Griffith also unintentionally took on a human soul, or at least part of one. The real reason Griffith hasn't killed Guts yet, and why it'll backfire. To put it simply, killing Guts is no longer Griffith's goal. It was among his final desires as a human being, but as an entity that transcends all of space and time, such a meaningless squabble has no hold over him. What he did to Casca was purely for his own amusement, and to remind us the full extent of the evil to which he'd stoop. With his powers, he should have known that Casca was with child, yet he impregnated her anyway. It's bloody ironic then that his only emotional act as a God Hand is going to become the reason for his downfall, because in impregnating Casca, he also created a deterrent for himself. Femto's seed mutated the human fetus within her womb and transformed it into a half-human, half-demon hybrid. Casca and Guts' demon child has the nature of a demon, but it has a body of flesh, and it can be killed like any other human. Femto probably didn't care about all this at the time because he couldn't have anticipated what role it would play in his incarnation. Even though the God Hand can interpret the flow of causality, its interpretation isn't precise or perfect. They aren't prescient, and they only know a version of events closest to what will actually happen. They couldn't predict that the vessel they were preparing for Femto's incarnation would end up swallowing the demon child as a dying gesture, which in turn would fuse a tiny, vulnerable soul into the greater fabric of his now human existence. Post-incarnation, Griffith retains 99% of his powers and abilities as a God Hand. He still can't be harmed with metaphysical weapons, let alone physical ones. His spatial abilities have reached new heights, and he's performing evening light shows using the souls of the dead as his light source to display his command over life and death. But that 1% that's the demon child within him keeps him from harming one person in particular, and that's Casca. Soon after his incarnation, Griffith visited Guts and Rickard to see if the sight of his old comrades could make his frozen heart sway. He'd always been a cautious man, wary of any variable that could possibly influence the outcome of his dream. Seeing Guts did nothing to sway him, so he took it as a sign that he was going to be just fine. Given that Guts couldn't lay a finger on him by contrast, Griffith thought himself safe and killing Guts pointless. He was a sacrificial offering that his inconsequential thralls should have taken care of ages ago. If anything, his continued survival was proof of their failure, and he could afford to let it slide because he's got a lot more resources at his disposal now than he did back then. Chief among them is his apostle army and control over his immediate environment, which he hopes will soon envelop the entire world. With designs this grand, he doesn't have the time or luxury to indulge a grudge from a life that was a lifetime ago for him. So he never quite comes for Guts as he does for the rest of his contacts because they pose a greater threat to his dream. Flora's knowledge and skills could have prevented his world spiral tree from infesting the physical world, so he killed her and destroyed her sanctuary. The mages of Elfhelm could have done the same, only with much more firepower, so he destroyed their island and took away their magical support. Griffith can kill Guts with a snap of his fingers now, but he doesn't do it because he doesn't care. He's content with letting him see the extent of his helplessness in the face of true power, because to him, Casca is more of a concern. She's the key to his weakness, and so he kidnaps her and puts her in a trance to keep himself protected. He's lucky the Moonlight Boy doesn't feel the exact same way about its father as it does its mother, because if it did, he'd be in serious trouble. Throughout his entire life, the demon child had been antagonized by his father, to the extent of having his very existence threatened by him. Guts never quite killed him because ultimately he knew this was his son, but he also didn't want him, and he made that known very vocally. During his time as the Black Swordsman, Casca was confined to an elf cave that warded off all demonic spirits, so the demon child had to make do with his father's tough love. But when he turned into the Moonlight Boy, that changed, because now he had the face of a human the Guts could trust. In his very first appearance, the Moonlight Boy harbored an inexplicable hostility in his aura that none of the magic users in his vicinity could understand. But the terror in his eyes every time he beheld Guts told us that he was still scared his dad might try to kill him. When the exact opposite happened and Guts and Casca saved him from falling into a heap of knives, his opinion changed and the hostility vanished from his ode. Every subsequent appearance showed him inching closer to his father, both physically and emotionally, and it's a bittersweet thing that their best shared experience occurred shortly before his darkest secret was exposed. But now that we know the Moonlight Boy is the demon child and it remembers its parents, the question becomes, will it protect Guts like it protects Casca? When Griffith visited Guts soon after his incarnation, there was a moment where Casca's life came under fire from an exploding ore cave. There was no way Guts could save her life, that's how huge the rocks headed her direction were, but just as she was about to give up hope, Griffith showed up and protected her. She oddly reached out for him while being repulsed by him at the same time, and soon after, the God Hand departed the scene with a faint beating emanating from his chest. Turns out, it wasn't Griffith who saved Casca, it was the demon child, and when its feelings resurfaced, his mother could sense him. Now that Guts had unwittingly resolved a lot of his issues with the kid, it's possible that he could get similar treatment upon being reunited with him, but that's a long shot. The Moonlight Boy did nothing to protect Casca from being kidnapped by Griffith or to help Guts in landing a blow on him. His appearance seems to be connected to a life-threatening risk to his parents, and considering Griffith wasn't there to kill them, he probably didn't feel the need to save them. But now that he has Casca and is more than likely to come up against Guts in his global conquest, those circumstances will change. If Griffith genuinely expresses killing intent directed towards Guts, his inner resident might just hold him back long enough for his dad to finish the job. It's either this, or Guts is being kept alive for a greater reason, one Griffith might not be aware of, but Void seems to be. Every encounter Guts has had with the God Hand, he's managed to defy their collective expectations, which is crazy to begin with because they can supposedly foresee everything. Well, we say collective, but the one person that always seems to be in the proper know is Void. When Guts and Casca escape the final eclipse, Slan and Ubik openly express their surprise, but the close-ups of Void's face that Miura showed us in those moments spoke louder than words ever could. We see a similar thing play out 2 years later when Guts comes surprisingly close to landing a blow on Femto with Dragon Slayer despite being in pain that could literally kill him. The rest of his kinsmen write him off because they know a regular branded human could never bear the presence of a God Hand, but Void's closed eyelids see more than their open ones do, it seems, because Guts recovers the very next moment. If he still has some causal role to play, albeit one only known to Void, it would make sense why Griffith hasn't killed him yet, but these are the only reasons we can come up with to explain what should have happened 100 chapters ago, realistically speaking. Guts was the greatest obstacle to his dream in his human life. It's only sensible that he would be the same thing to him in his demonic life as well. No matter how much Griffith dismisses him, he can't deny that he'll eventually have to kill him to put an end to his mischievous meddling. But if it puts his dream in jeopardy, even by 0.1%, it's a risk he won't be willing to take, and that might just prove to be his undoing. We know Guts will stop at nothing to end him, and given that this is a story where the good guys need to win, Griffith's arrogant mercy is sure to come back and haunt him one day. Marvelous verdict! And that's it for this one. We want to know your thoughts on why Griffith hasn't killed Guts yet, or what would happen if he finally did, so let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but you can always find me on Twitch. Until next time, keep on struggling, strugglers.